And good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020. And this morning, well, I'm just going to be doing a Mindfields. Mindfields is when I can let my mind run and to share with you what's on my mind this morning here on November the 9th, 2020. We've had a great week of interviews with Addie Ads and Dave Underdown, George Webb, of course, Professor Hamamoto. And this week we've got another great interview coming up with Bill Taylor. Bill's perspective is so interesting, and he's a great, great writer at his blog at Deep State Analytics. So Bill Taylor is on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. I am finishing up Strength of the Wolf tonight. I'm going to wrap it up. And let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody getting my attention here. I'm sorry. So listen, I was going to tell you that this week, as far as reading, I'm going to wrap up the Strength of the Wolf by Douglas Valentine tonight. Put that together and really concentrate on remembering the nuggets that we got from the book. And then I'm going to move on to a new book, and it's one that I've recently become aware of. It's another example of me just not being able to resist reading a book that I haven't fully digested myself yet. I started doing that 6 months ago, and I'm afraid I'm unable to resist when I get into a really good book and I say, wow, I got to share this. So this is the one, it's called War Against the Weak. And it's about America's war against the weak, putting into effect the ideas of eugenics in rural America. And stuff that's just horrible, but stories has to be told. So I'm going to be enjoying as much as I can sharing that book with you, because in the spirit of Edwin Black, who wrote it, it's got to have a good result, that now we can know and understand the thinking behind what was going on then, because I do think that that's very relevant to what's going on now, when we have people like Michael Bloomberg saying we can't afford to keep treating the old people. He said something like that, I understand. If I'm misquoting him, I apologize. But there are plenty of examples of these, Nazi ideas that we call Nazi ideas, but existed in America before there was a Nazi party in Germany. And I will just mention the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute and Rockefeller's connection to that, and we can leave it there for now, because I want to move into my subject for the day, which is Beyond Orange Man Bad. Let me check and make sure we've got a connection here before I go any further. Some reason YouTube is not refreshing me as fast as it used to before the big purge. Okay, I see we're up there now, and audio's okay, I trust. All right, let's have a sip of coffee. Good morning, everyone. Nan, Chekhov, Michael, E-Cat, Norman, man. Okay, sounds good. Okay, great. Yeah, we upgraded our microphones about maybe 6 weeks ago here at the studio, and I think it's given us a lot of positive feedback. So thanks. Um, may I suggest one way that we can invite people into a reasonable discussion, folks that, I mean, not today, not tomorrow, but as the days drag on and their fears that Trump's going to, not leave the White House if he loses, they just keep on getting excited about this. And I just keep on saying, look, there's a process, and one of the things that I want everybody on all around to understand is that if it turns out that there's not any fraud, or if it turns out that the fraud that there's proven is not sufficient to change the result, then I am going to congratulate the winner, whoever it is, and I'm going to shake hands with anybody that wants to shake hands with me and say, okay, game over. And that's what I think we all need to understand. And folks have been told that we're going to rise up or we're going to not accept the results. And the propaganda assault on the ears of the left and the people that voted for Biden, the propaganda assault on them has been continuous for 4 years now. And that's because the big banks just can't stand Donald Trump. So what can we do? Well, my first suggestion is let's listen to the old people. The old people. Yeah, the people that have been here for a while. Maybe even considering myself here as perhaps a bit of a gray hair. Not that I'm unique, and this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to suggest that we listen to some of these folks from LaRouche PAC this morning. Barbara Boyd is one of their core writers, reporters, and analysts. And what she said on Saturday is really, really important. So I think if you want, get a piece of paper out and a pencil and take notes, like you're taking a class, and let's see what we come up with as talking points. Because really, I think, between Barbara Boyd and one more of these speakers, you're going to have a lot that you can hand to people if you package it right, if you've got it into bullet points, if you've got it into an elevator speech, if you've got the references that you can give. So anyway, let's listen, if you will, with me, and pay attention, class. Take notes. I'm not going to test you, but I do want to know what you think are the main bullet point takeaways from what we learned here from Barbara Boyd, and hopefully I've got that set up right. Hang on.
You all probably saw that yesterday Sidney Powell, who is Michael Flynn's attorney, broke the story on Hammer and Scorecard on Lou Dobbs, a widely watched Fox program. We're putting up Kirk Wiebe's exposition of this from yesterday and a Zoom conference call, hosted by your host here today. And I hope that Kirk will tell you more about that if he can today. Another voting systems case is being examined, and that involves a company called Dominion Voting Systems, which may have been caught, as they say, in flagrante in the act in both Michigan and Georgia, changing votes, getting caught, and then what happened is votes mysteriously went back and forth between congressional candidates and Biden and the president. It's presently unclear to me how this operation intersects with Hammer and Scorecard, although Kirk may have something more to say on that. In Nevada, which sent mail-in ballots out to every registered voter, the Republicans did a survey in which they proved that 3,000 out-of-state voters at least, or dead people, voted, and they've referred their case on that to the Department of Justice, which presumably can undertake the relatively tedious task of examining voter rolls filled with dead people and people who have moved but somehow managed to vote, although the campaign may have to do that themselves. That is the tack which we found, as Dennis referenced, in 1976, going way back, where registration rolls simply are never cleaned up because every time you try and clean them up, it's alleged by the Democrats that you're involved in voter suppression. Now, the major cities in each of the battleground states, Milwaukee, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Detroit, are famous for traditional vote fraud practices, such as the one I just mentioned, dead people voting, late night ballot stuffing, and other forms of fraud aided and abetted this year under the cover of the emergency conditions of crisis created by the COVID epidemic. As I said on Thursday night, on the Thursday night LaRouche PAC call, such emergency changes in the law under conditions of economic or pandemic type crises, in this case, shocks to the population psychologically, is exactly how Hitler assumed power in Germany under emergency conditions. One hypothesis on the patterns here, which I think is worth entertaining, is going way back to the Iowa Democratic primaries of this year, which, if people recall, normally the way it happens in the United States is the Iowa caucuses precede the New Hampshire primary, at which point more or less front runner status is accumulated to a candidate and money flows accordingly into his or her campaigns. If you recall, Bernie Sanders was widely thought to have won the Iowa caucuses. Somehow there was a complete computer glitch, which ended up in the caucus not being called until way into the New Hampshire primary season. They said it was a software problem. I think a question which has to be raised is, was Bernie Sanders defrauded in the same way that he was by the Democrats as they are attempting to actually defraud Donald Trump right now? So in Iowa, what happened is, surprisingly, after all of that, the guy I call the upstart from McKinsey Consulting, Mayor Pete, ended up being the announced winner of something which was a highly irregular occurrence. Now, the other thing I want to focus on in my short report today, and I'm pretty much shot, so I'm going to have to leave this call and do some other things which I'm trying to shove into my schedule right now. But what I want to actually emphasize is the political situation which is the backdrop to all of this and has been the backdrop to the coup. Last night and all day yesterday, really, Joe Biden had his campaign calling every single media book in the world, particularly AP, who they pounded, demanding that AP, who is the traditional media caller of the election, regardless of whether the vote is counted or not, to demand that they announce right then and there, which they did, that Biden was the new president of the United States. That call was, being made all through the afternoon, according to various reports. And finally, at 11 o'clock last night, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris appeared to talk to a bunch of cars. This is sort of how coups work, and a coup in the COVID environment, that's how this turns out to work. You're trying to create an overwhelming psychological warfare operation in which the result seems obvious, completely intact. There's no way to resist it. This is really what happened. So people feel isolated, overwhelmed, or they resort, which is part of the scenario which is being run here, to a frustrated flight into violence and wipe themselves out. So at the press conference, as significantly, he announced that what his mandate was for the Green New Deal, his approach to COVID, and overcoming systemic racism. Just today, when Rudy Giuliani was trying to hold a press conference about how every Republican poll watcher was effectively barred from the polls in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, despite a court order allowing them in, the Associated Press called the presidential race yet again for Biden, and that call was actually affirmed by Fox, so that Giuliani actually got completely drowned out trying to tell people what exactly was going on. Now, on Thursday, I called attention to the simple fact that Joe Biden's campaign slogan, like everything else with this guy, "Build Back Better," was stolen. And it was stolen from the slogan of the World Economic Forum, otherwise known as Davos. And the World Economic Forum has adopted that slogan, Biden's campaign slogan, for using COVID as a cover to impose what they call a new regime of, quote, reinventing capitalism in the face of COVID. If it isn't clear to you by now, these are the people who actually own the Democratic Party in the United States, lock, stock, and barrel. This is Bloomberg. This is Mark Carney from England, who's running this through BlackRock. This is Google with Eric Schmidt. This is, Andrew Cuomo, who said exactly the same thing. We're going to reimagine the state of New York in the wake of COVID. That's another term which is being used explicitly in the Davos publicity campaign. And I would assert for you that the Democratic Party, to the extent that it wasn't that already, has now become the party of overt fascism. To give you just a taste for what I'm talking about here, Zeke Emanuel, from the Obama administration, the guy who was the death panel guy for Obamacare, is the main advisor to Joe Biden concerning COVID. I'm willing to bet that if you actually listen, you're going to wonder how many older folks will get prioritized for a vaccine, which will not be fully produced until significant numbers of the same older people have died off. If you recall, Zeke Emanuel uses this metric, which he calls the quality of life metric. How many good years do you actually have left? Now, Mike Bloomberg, who's essential to this whole thing, got caught on videotape virtually saying the same thing. He was sitting Shiva as mayor of New York, and he told people outright that we've reached a limit as to what we can afford under our model of the economy in terms of the baby boomer population, which is about to hit its older segment and older stride in numbers which are untold. He said, we simply can't afford to treat them. We can't afford to deal with their diseases. These mechanisms have already been put largely in place through the City of London, through BlackRock, through Mark Carney, through Mike Bloomberg, and other central bankings, so that any entity or industry which you want to have exist in the world has to conform to green standards if they're going to get any money. To give you a flavor of this, I highlight just one statement from the statement, quote, and this is up on the World Economic Forum's website, to build back better, we must reinvent capitalism. That's the statement I'm quoting from. Here is they claim that the riots in the United States took the form that they did because they represented a discontinuity created by COVID. Strange statement. Then they say, quote, other possible COVID-induced discontinuities ahead range from a full-blown financial crisis to a steep change in the rate of global energy transition. Some analysts now reckon that fossil fuel demand may have peaked in 2019 for good. Don't need a lot of energy if people are dying. Now, on the good side, I can report to you that people are out in car rallies now throughout the nation, and that part of the peaceful protests we have called for, and which must increase massively, are really underway. Our job right now will be to massively publicize the building and resounding case as to the stealing of the election, and to demonstrate to people the deeper implications of the world fascist program at the heart of the coup against this president, and why Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws for economic recovery become and must become the battle cry for saving the republic right now. So we'll be working further on this throughout the week, and that's what I have to say.
Okay.
Let me check back in with you guys now. I got so much out of that, and most of it, I guess, is really information for us to understand the process of what the LaRouche folks, and I think a lot of other folks are saying, is that we're going to have to do some education of our friends, and we're going to have to show some visibility, both here on the internet, but also, out in the streets in Washington, D.C. This Saturday, there's going to be a big convocation, I understand. And I do not know who to trust, but I do agree with the great Mark Kulak at Housatonic that a lot of stuff that we're seeing that's being thrown at us is psyops to keep us, either to confuse us or more likely to lead us, Pied Piper like down the primrose path until we've committed ourselves to promoting something that's totally absurd. And I can tell you that's not a good thing to do, because it destroys your credibility. So we, to hang on to our credibility, need to have some guts behind what we're saying. And I don't mean courage so much as I mean substance. And that's why I say let's listen to the old folks, okay? And no offense to everybody, but we're getting gray. But, I went to William & Mary in 1970. I graduated in 1974. I guess to you that sounds like the 19th century if you're a young person. But it's not that long ago. And, to live through what we've lived through, it should give you some idea that it's be valuable to listen to what people have to say that have been there, have done that. So let's take a moment. Let me get the chat room back up here where I can see it. Let's see. Well, Lucas, I'm with you on that. I'm just going to wait and see what happens as far as what George has to say, and I've been hoping that there's a good Mossad, and I still hope there's a good Mossad. The tone that I got from Barbara is, Barbara Boyd, is that this is a psychological war, and that we are right now at the climax of that war, and in which, if President Trump sustains his presidency, then they will be seeing that they've lost. And confusing the folks that have supported Biden and Harris as if they were actually going to help bring some freedom or relief or justice, no justice, no peace, we used to say, that these folks are actually going to be agents of change in favor of the disadvantaged. No. You heard what Barbara Boyd was saying, that these people are saying, hey, if you're old, if your best years are gone, your most productive years ago are gone, we cannot afford to treat you. So that's on, the elderly, the helpless elderly. You think about my grandfather, my dad's father, who was put into a nursing home after he lost both of his legs to diabetes, and so he was in a wheelchair, and they kept him medicated, they kept him opiated, and even though when I'd go to see him, and it was rare that I could go, that I would say, please, can you lay off the meds long enough for me to have a visit with him? And yeah, see, they're going to do that if they're already doing that, right? But the value of human life to them is really nothing. It's pure Adam Smith, Galton, Spencer, Darwin, social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and they have appointed themselves to be the survivors. Yeah, I can't imagine wanting the Iran deal back, but doesn't it make sense now that with some corruption on the Iran side and then some corruption on the China side, that you've got both ends of the Belt and Road, So if you're a Biden family member and Biden's going to be the president, well, it makes sense to give him a nice cushy job and some benefits, maybe attack his mind with some drugs and get him under mind control like they like to do to people. Mind control. Addiction is mind control. Simple as that. Get somebody hooked on something and they'll do whatever you want. They know that. You know that. But Joe Biden is just like, he's cleaned up now. Okay. So the outlook for COVID plan is lockdown, as far as I can see. And I don't see how we can survive a lockdown either. I think that they want the lockdown in order to impose the digital currency. You think about currency for a minute, okay? The Congress has the exclusive right to coin and mint money, okay? So the banks got around that by printing money instead of coining it. So instead of having some metal in our pockets that's worth something, we got pieces of paper that say on it it's worth something. But now we go to stage 3. But we don't even have a piece of paper anymore. All we've got is a computer that sits in our office that if we want to see if we have any money, we go and open up and see if we have any digital credits in our bank account, because we won't have any paper money. We won't have any coins. and we won't have any control over the computers. So I'd say that makes us pretty dependent upon Big Brother. You know, when I took civics in high school, I mean, it wasn't a very good course. The football coach taught the course, but at least we had a course. And when I went to college, and for some reason, I'm not sure why, I decided to take a government course. I got hooked on it. There's some great teachers at William & Mary. Roger Smith, a fabulous professor, wrote a book about guilt as a tool of politicians, you know. A very, very great lecturer and a guy that asked really cool questions. I took philosophy from him, American and you know, European. American political philosophy. What the heck does that mean? Does that mean cutthroat competition like Cornelius Vanderbilt or Rockefeller, Carnegie, GM? You know, is that what it is? Is that the American political philosophy? No, that's the philosophy of the British. That's the system of cartels where you get to sell the tires and you get to sell the brakes and you get to sell the steering wheels and you get to make the ball bearings that go into the wheels. And everybody gets their little piece of the pie, and it's little bitty triangle slices, right? And the triangle slices add up and you get a bigger pie and a bigger. But you're never going to get out of that particular pie that you started off with the first slice in. You're going to be stuck there. There's no upward mobility in this crazy economy right now. If you look back at the way people thought in the early republic, it was all about personal liberty, you know? And yes, I know that we had slaves. We had millions of slaves, and it was a horrible thing. But, you know, we've had slaves. Humanity has had slaves throughout human history. And it was this country that first was able to establish an independent republic based upon liberty. And it is that liberty that keeps me from having to take a vaccine. It's that liberty that entitles me to speak my mind. And it is that liberty that entitles me to have a fair court hearing in a dispute. And so that's all we really have right now is a dispute over whether certain ballots are legitimate or not. It's very technical and esoteric and requires expertise and lots of time to sort it out. The separation of powers is also a very important argument to share with your friends, you know, because the newspapers, the magazines, the control media, and you know, you've seen the chart, right, with the 6 lines that go down to the 600 newspapers and 1,000, you know, channels and everything, all go back up to the same top, you know, at the, you know, the CFR or whichever one it is that controls the media. But it's all controlled, you know, and the FCC sees to it that it's cartels. You know, you get this bandwidth, you get that bandwidth, you know, for the whole country. And it's all about the imperial system, the empire, the British pyramid system. You know, you become a salesperson in a pyramid scheme, and you may rise a little bit in life, but no, they're going to be robbing you the whole way. I wish I knew why Netanyahu did what he did, but there's got to be a reason. Maybe it's a sucker punch. I don't know. I just don't know, but it's very disappointing. Dennis Speed is the host of this particular episode of the LaRouche Pack, and he has something to say before Harley Schlanger talks. And I'm going to give Dennis and Harley the next
Thank
few
you,
minutes.
Barbara.
Okay.
So let's go now to Harley.
Okay, thank you, Dennis, and thank you,
Oh,
Barbara,
well, here we go.
Helga, and Kirk. I'm going to give a little bit more of the background to what Barbara was discussing to make clear that we're dealing with something that is international in scope, but is an attack on the United States, an attack on the American system, and an attack on every voter, because it essentially takes away your one power that you have in our republic, which is the ability to determine what the policy should be through a process of representative government. What we're seeing with this vote fraud operation is a culmination of a 4-year attack on Donald Trump, beginning with the time when he began to move ahead in the Republican primaries. It was launched out of London through the coordination with the Obama intelligence team. You know most of the story. If you haven't figured it out yet, it's all up on the LaRouche PAC website, what this coup represented in terms of a systemic series of lies, frauds, and slanders, which are very familiar to us because this is the same pattern that was used to attempt to destroy the reputation of Lyndon LaRouche. Now, in covering this, we noticed a few things that are quite significant. That the people involved in this, including in the Obama team, including the Bush Republicans, and including the networks in London of MI6 and the City of London, were the same networks that were responsible for the shift in world policy and politics after 2001, after 9/11. In a sense, what we're talking about is the group that used 9/11 to consolidate a surveillance state, a security state, in which the United States was dominated by a permanent bureaucracy that was responsible not to the voters, but to what some people call the military-industrial complex, the deep state, the shadow government, but which really is directed from the City of London networks. And that's why we call it the British Empire.
All right, I'm just going to stop Harley right there to say, take notes, understand what he just said. Okay, this goes back to 9/11, which was their springboard for imposing a bureaucratic shadow government behind the scenes that has been increasingly taking over our everything, our even some say our minds, with their technological power and their stealth and their secrecy. And this is what I say this election is really about.
Now, there are two trends in this post-2001 consolidation. One goes back to 1971, which LaRouche identified with the shift away from the Bretton Woods system under Richard Nixon, carried out by some of the same people who have been involved in this coup. But it was for a radical transformation of the global economy, which Barbara was just talking about today in terms of the Davos crowd. But what we've had since 1971 is a speculative system, which creates repeatedly bubbles that benefit the wealthy, the shareholders, at the expense of the producers. And we've seen this throughout the 80s, the 90s, the repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999, the bubble around .com, and then, of course, the 2008 crash. And then instead of fixing it, instead of addressing the problem, Obama escalated the move toward a speculative economy against the physical economy. And prior to this election, going back a year, we saw a return to a new crisis, a bigger crisis, a debt bubble of all sorts of debt, the everything bubble, some people call it. But we were headed toward a complete collapse, and that dramatically led to the escalation of the policy direction that we see identified by Barbara. The second trend was a trend toward imperial geopolitics dominating international affairs. This includes permanent warfare. It includes the adoption of the unipolar worldview of the Project for a New American Century, which was the team behind the Bush-Cheney administration launching the series of wars which President Trump has accurately characterized as endless wars with no benefit to the security of the American people.
Now, if there's any type of a message that could get through to your average peacenik, I would think that would be it. To me, the Orange Man Bad campaign has been directed at turning off your average peace-minded person. Women, the young women that were out in the streets with the pussy hat thing, and all of that crowd is so turned off by the propaganda, and that they can't see the value of peace. Peace is more important than red or blue in your political system. If they can't understand that Trump has given us peace instead of endless war, which is exactly what Eisenhower told us we're going to get, then what's happened to their values? So peaceniks, look here. This is where the endless wars can stop.
Now, the vote in 2016 that elected Donald Trump was a rejection of these two trends toward the bubble economy, the deindustrialized economy, the wealth transfer to the extremely rich, the speculative economy, and the war economy. It was a rejection. It was explicitly stated by President Trump that he was running to end the wars, to end the green policy. He pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords, to end the free trade globalization regime. And as an outsider, he moved to do this. He was attacked relentlessly from the beginning. And this is why Russiagate was launched, the Ukraine impeachment was carried out, the attempt to keep the old paradigm in place. Now, the problem with trying to do this is that you have to convince the American people to accept it. And what we've seen throughout the Trump administration is a president who is willing to go over the heads of the media directly to the people through Twitter, sometimes in colorful language, to put it gently, but in a way in which he told them that he was fighting for their interests, not for this corrupt and collapsing establishment. And this just increased the anger directed toward him in the media. Now, one of the new elements in the post-2001 period, and Kirk may have something to say about this, one of the new elements in the so-called military-industrial complex is the social media, internet operation that was brought in with the surveillance state. The Googles, the Apples, the Amazon, Yahoo, and so on. Twitter, Facebook, which we now see playing an integral role in suppressing the truth about what's being done to this country.
Well, I've got to stop there and just make a comment that those of us that have been on Facebook and Twitter and everything else have felt that we're doing the best we can to communicate with our fellow citizens so that the truth can be unveiled. But we have to face the fact that these are tools of the military intelligence complex. And as we've learned from many anecdotes, many people's stories, and so many theories, some of which are probably correct, that this is really just a way for them to pinpoint and analyze each individual person in this country and probably in the world, so they can be influenced by the very same social media that we think we're using to help unveil what they're doing. That's my comment.
And we've seen it repeatedly in terms of the deplatforming by Facebook and YouTube, the attacks, even the president now when he tweets, they put up a heading which says, this may not be accurate what you're about to read. I think that it's a little harsher than that, what they say. And so what we're dealing with now is an enemy of this country that we should recognize if we were really educated American citizens. The enemy to this country is the imperial system centered in the city of London, which has used the United States repeatedly in the 20th and 21st century as the military muscle to protect and excuse me, to protect and to reinforce this looting system for the banks. And now we're seeing, with the emergence of what they think will be a Biden administration, is a move toward an even more direct global bankers dictatorship in the form of a global digital currency, and a global digital currency in which central banks acting on behalf of private banks will be determining not just credit policy, which they do now, but spending policy, fiscal policy, taking away from elected representatives the power to make policies. And what that means is that we're going to have more deindustrialization, worse health care, no infrastructure spending, as Barbara was just indicating, the so-called Davos plan. That's where we're headed if this coup is allowed to succeed. The coup has not succeeded up to the point of the election for two reasons. One is President Trump and his immediate allies fought it. And we now have, because of that fight, enormous documentation of the corruption of the intelligence agencies, of the security agencies, of the diplomatic corps, and what people call the permanent bureaucracy. You know, for example, 1,000 former DOJ officials signing the letter attacking Attorney General Barr for his actions on the Flynn case and the Roger Stone case, which were, in Barr's case, the absolute right thing to do, given the volume of corruption that's been exposed. So we have a great deal of material communicating, or which demonstrates the corruption of these agencies. Unfortunately, some of these agencies are still suppressing it, including the CIA Director Haspel, including the FBI Director Wray, the Secretary of State Pompeo, and others. Among other things that has to happen now is that documentation has to be made public to show the extent to which the security state and the military-industrial complex has seized control over the functioning of government from elected officials, including the president. And it's from that standpoint, then, that we look at this whole question of the final stage of the coup, the fraud committed in this election to get President Trump out of office. And I think this is what we can say is the coup. The final act of the coup would be to carry out this vote fraud, to proclaim Biden as president, with the expectation that you will sit back and accept it. Now, what we're seeing so far from the president is he's not going to accept it. As he said when he was told AP called the election, the Associated Press called the election for Biden, he said it's the American people through their legal votes who determine the president, not the media. So we have some time now to get to the bottom of the fraud and the corruption that went into this election. But I wanted to make sure that you understand that the origin of this is the attack that goes back to Russiagate, that goes back to the reorganization of the world economy beginning in 1971, goes back to the takeover of both parties by neoliberal economic policy and neoconservative geopolitical doctrine. That's why this fight in America is not just for Americans. In a sense, we in America are fighting to bring about a new paradigm in the world. And the much of the rest of the world is watching to see what we're going to do. In Europe, unfortunately, the media is so corrupt that many people are looking at this as the Great Liberation. But in fact, around all over the world, including in major countries such as Russia, China, many of the developing sector countries, there's an intense interest in what we are going to do to see if the American people will rise to the occasion presented by this crisis. And so, Dennis, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say as an introduction.
Okay. Thank you, Harley.
Well, I'm going to stop it there. That's a great pair of interviews, a pair of 10, 15-minute things that you can play. You can play it at LaRouche Pack, or if you want, you can just say, hey, here's John's latest Mindfields. Listen to John. It'll think it through. Don't shoot the messenger. Hopefully you can stand to listen to John O'Loughlin for 45 minutes, and then consider what these scholars are saying, these people that have been studying this for 40 years. Because that's where the guts are. It's in our institutional knowledge, in the wonderful old sense of learning and learning how to think, how to consider an idea without getting emotionally involved in it. As so many young people seem to fail, keeping their emotions away from their theorizing. It's like, no, you can't think anymore because you are programmed to accept what you're told, and nowhere more than in the field of vaccines. And, the world is a dangerous place. We've got to stop trusting nature. We've got to trust Big Pharma. That's been the song they've been singing for 150 years, and man, they are sure making a lot of money at it. Well, destruction of nature is, not good. Not good. Destruction of the air, the water, the soil, and then destruction of our health. And the use of psychological warfare upon our brains to make us think this is the way it's supposed to be. But it's not. Go back and listen to Patrick Henry. Study George Mason. I did. This is a guy that objected to the Constitution, but was able to succeed in getting the Bill of Rights into our basic founding document. So, why? Why? Because they knew that never in history, in thousands and thousands of years, had people been able to establish a republic in which everybody has certain rights and that they're recognized and honored in the law. You didn't have that in England. You don't have it now in England. The people of England are subjects. And if their parliamentarian is a, elitist, then there's nothing they can do about it. We, on the other hand, we're supposed to be taking responsibility for our government. So this is where it's headed. No matter what happens in the presidential election, no matter what happens, and Biden comes in and starts signing us back into the Paris Accords and everything looks awful, remember that we do have separation of powers in this country, and that the key to everything is Congress. So 2 years from now, if we can really drain Congress's swamp, then the president will have to follow the law, because the executive only executes the laws. He doesn't have the power to come up with his own ideas like Alan Dulles thought he had the power to do. I'm thrilled to have George Webb's, his, what should I say? His acolytes, is that too diminutive of a term? Anyway, the young people that have jumped into the fight, investigative journalists, they can't shut us all up, and that's where it comes. It's always going to end bad when you think you can control people's minds. There is no good outcome if you think you can control somebody's mind. Look at the mess that Alan Dulles made. Look at the mess Richard Bissell made. Frank Wisner, Richard Helms. Look at this fucking disaster that they have created. Arrogance. All right. Thanks for listening. And remember, these are the talking points that I recommend you use. And we'll leave it right there.